All right, thanks everyone. So I'm going to invite Kate Trimble up to the stage. Kate is the Senior Associate Dean and Director of the Office of Experiential Learning. And she's going to be kicking off the next panel, but also hopefully collecting some of the ideas that you guys have generated in your table reflection.
Yes. Thanks, Susie. Hi, everybody. I'm Kate, as Susie said, and I'm here because Julie asked me. She's like the godfather of sustainability. She comes and asks you for a favor, and you do not refuse. I'm also here with my co-chair of the working group on education for the steering committee, the leadership committee. And so what the exercise you all did just kind of did our homework for us. So propelling our working group forward in leaps and bounds. And I wonder if we could just take a few minutes to share like the one sustainability competency that your table really sort of landed on as an essential thing that MIT ought to be imparting to students while they're here. I'll call on you if you don't raise your hand. Yes? Oh, just yell.
Okay.
Pressure.
Oh, okay. Hi, I'm Maureen McCaffrey. I work in Matimco. Our group came to the conclusion that systems thinking, which was your keyword, systems thinking was the most important, so that if you're creating, inventing, or innovating, an important component of that would be to include how your water source or energy source or material source was handled sustainably.
Awesome. Let's get one or two more. Elise, the ringer in the audience.
Hi, I'm Elise Chambers. I work with a first-year learning community, Terrascope, and the thing that we started talking about was the idea of effective team building and how to identify effective partners.
Excellent. All right. And one more in the back there.
I'm Drew Nichols. I'm with the School of Architecture and Planning, and at my table we were talking about a willingness to change and challenge economic systems, because one key factor we were noticing in the roundtables is that almost everybody said, but it costs too much, people can't afford to do it. So there's a piece there that seems to be really critical for creating sustainable change.
Great. Interesting that none of these are sort of technical or scientific skills. So with that, I'd like to bring up our four fantastic panelists. We've got David McGee, who is an associate professor in EAPS and the director of Terrascope First Year Learning Community. Peter Goddard, who is a graduate student in mechanical engineering and an instructor in McGee's Capstone design courses. We have Rebecca Grekin, who is a senior in chemical engineering and is the co-chair of the UA's Sustainability Committee and the co-founder of Waste Watchers, for those of you who went to that table during the sort of speed dating round. And then lastly, but not least, Susanne Rasmussen, who is the Director of Environmental and Transportation Planning for the City of Cambridge and an MIT alum in the City Planning Master's Program. So come on up, guys. So I wanted to start, it's funny, listening to everything this morning, you can kind of forget that MIT is like an educational institution, that we're just, not just about moving materials through and building buildings and all of that we're actually a school. So I wanted to start with the students, with Rebecca and Peter, to hear a little bit more about like the most transformative kind of aha moments that you've had as students around the topic of sustainability. So we'll start with Rebecca.
Sure. So hi, everyone. Again, I'm a senior in chemical engineering, and I'm actually doing the minor in environment sustainability. So that's definitely been a big part of my sustainability education here at MIT. But I think the big aha moment that I had was actually I joined the Undergraduate Association Committee on Sustainability as a freshman and was already kind of thrust into a leadership position, which was really great because it showed me that even as a freshman, just getting on campus, I actually had the power to kind of do something. So I actually helped with the eco subcommittee, which kind of was focused on decreasing the amount of waste that was going on campus. And then from there, I actually started the outreach subcommittee within the sustainability committee, and now I'm the co-chair. So it's been a huge part of my time here at MIT, and it's been really awesome to see all the projects that we've been able to accomplish and all the partners that I've been able to interact with at MIT. I actually recognize a good amount of people in the audience, so that's always really cool.
So my name is Peter Goddard, and so I was really into sustainability even in high school. I actually worked at a lab at Rutgers University when I was a junior in high school doing carbon capture. And actually, when I got to MIT, I kind of got distracted initially from that interest. And I saw robotics and just machine learning and circuits and just, we call it the fire hose. And that sort of overwhelmed me with these things that just seemed so cool and that I wanted to do everything. And it kind of took me until senior year to get an exposure again to some sustainability related project. And that was in one of these Capstone design classes. And I sort of reminded myself of like, oh my God, yeah, I actually care about this. But by that time, I had already accepted a job at the Jet Propulsion Lab at NASA Jet, doing robotics there. And my aha moment kind of came after I left MIT. And one of my jobs at JPL was actually driving the Mars rover around. And it literally took me looking out the eyes of this like Martian Prius every single day to realize that like we have no planet B. I would never want to live there. And I literally had this aha moment afterwards. I'm like, what have I done? Like, and I applied to grad school like pretty much the day after I realized that. and even so, while I was still at JPL, I was able to shift my energy towards an energy project, literally, and that's actually the research I'm currently doing. So it's a clean energy project now.
Wow. So I want to hear from David about how, as an instructor and a professor at MIT, you prevent the sort of Peter situation where students get to their senior year and go, oh yeah, I cared about that when I came in, and sort of lost my way somehow. How do you create the educational experiences? And Peter, too, as an instructor back in his old stomping grounds, how do you design these experiences for students so that they don't lose their way and end up on Mars?
That's a tough question, and I think I'm still living that in my own career path, right? And I think some of the elements that we are trying out and playing with in the Terrascope first-year learning community are first of all to put these fascinating and complicated and rich real-world environmental problems in front of students and give them enough freedom to surprise us and give enough freedom to explore them, and they come up against a bunch of really important realizations over the course of a year of exploring those problems. One of the first of which is to realize that they thought that probably the solution is going to be some neat hack or an app or some new technology innovation, but they quickly realized that yes, maybe technology is part of the solution, but there's this really rich array of social and economic and political and historical angles and local contexts that have to be taken into account too.
And different ways that you can come into the problem in terms of professional pathways, and I think that segues nicely into Suzanne's experience. And so, as a practitioner who's been in the field for a while, like when you look back on your MIT experience as a student, what do you carry forward with you? What do you look back and say, like, I'm really glad I took that class, or I sort of learned this at MIT and I'm still using it on a day-to-day basis?
As I was saying earlier, that there are some things that I remember, and those must be the important things because I remember them. But I would just say it's a long time ago since I was a grad student at MIT, and there was no such thing as sustainability. It did not exist as a thing that we did. So my sort of related moment was I took a 3-day class, which was about what to do after the day after the earthquake in Mexico City. And it was extremely instructive because we found ourselves in a situation, and because it's MIT, we had this amazing access. The Minister of Housing of Mexico actually came, and the head of the nonprofit entity that dealt with affordable housing were part of our workshop. So it was an amazing experience, but it was, you wake up there was an earthquake, what are we doing now? And that, everything has to happen all at the same time. You have to have emergency response. You have to have a policy around how are we going to rebuild the same way that it was, or is it a new idea? Where's the money coming from? Who takes what role? And you have to act now. It's not like you don't have like a year to think about it. So there's a lot of similarity in that experience. And I would just say that, and I grew up in Denmark, and I did go to graduate school in Denmark. I studied civil engineering and urban planning. And my university was brand new, and the idea was project-based learning and doing group projects. And that is what I've been doing every day of my working life. So collaborating with a very diverse set of people, doing project-based work, reaching consensus, those are extremely important, and they were certainly elements of that experience.
Yeah. I'm curious to know, too, like, what did you not get that you realized very quickly when you sort of launched out? And maybe everyone but Rebecca can answer this because she's not yet launched yet. Like that you sort of say, like, man, if I had known this, if I had learned this in school, my ability to be effective in the sustainability field would have been exponentially greater.
Well, I will say first that, you know, even though I had this aha moment after leaving MIT, if I hadn't had to have that experience as a senior, I would have had nothing to be like, oh, well, here's how I can actually refocus my life and focus on sustainable stuff. So I am really grateful for that experience, even though it came a little bit late in my career. But I think it's less like what I wish I had learned, but it's just, there's a lot of distractions. I learned like too much stuff that wasn't related to the things I actually care about.
So here's the recommendation from this panel. Students should learn less at MIT, I think, is that the headline now.
Well, there's so much to learn even about the things I do care deeply about, but I just wasn't guided in that direction.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say the one thing that we didn't do, which they did do at Harvard, which was the whole getting to yes, kind of how do you navigate in a very diverse world where you are trying to reach consensus around moving forward, because we need to get somewhere. And you can't just tell people, well, I am technically brilliant and I know what the answer is, right, and you should follow. I still have some colleagues that do that, but so it's that, and it's very hard. And it's emotionally difficult as well. And so that piece of it was certainly on-the-job training, and I don't know if that's happening now, but I think that's a really key skill to have.
I think a lot of students, you know, if there's a part of the technical part of a solution that they don't understand, they at least know the name for it. They know how to Google it, or they know how to start a conversation with someone about it. For most of the kind of psychological or social or even economic policy aspects of effective problem solving, they may not know that there's a name for the broader concept they're coming up against, or deep reservoirs of expertise, even though they are there. They just don't get communicated as readily in MIT's environment, I think.
I know I haven't left yet, but there are a couple things that I think I have learned through the process of being at MIT. And I've done some internships outside of MIT, and one of the things that I realized is that I hadn't stopped to think about what my definition of sustainability was. So like for some people that means that you can't work at an oil company doing stuff in sustainability but for an oil company, and for some people that means that sure, you can have an impact there. And so I think that was one of the things that kind of was lacking in my MIT education, was that I didn't have that time to, everyone says that you're drinking from a fire hose, but when do you take time to swallow and think about what it is that you are doing and where you want to go in the future?
Yeah. Well, and I'm curious about what the future should look like from your collective perspective. And I think back to the definition of sort of what is sustainability education, and I think that there's sort of the extreme side on the continuum where people are practitioners in the sustainability field, and this is kind of their driving charge and mission in life. And then there is, at a baseline, kind of like civics education, you may not be running for public office, but we want you to be an engaged, informed voter. So what's the sort of, how do we rethink education at MIT and maybe beyond to be both kind of cultivating sustainability aware and responsible citizens, right? And I think at MIT that's a particular breed, all the way to really turbocharged practitioners who are going to go out and innovate and accelerate changes in the field that are positive for the planet.
Yeah, so
just reinvent the whole higher ed enterprise now.
So one thing that I kind of wish I had as a senior was like if I could have a time machine and my old self came to me and shook me and was like, what are you doing? And so actually, my advisor and I, Doug Hart, we actually have a grant, we just won a grant, to do basically that, where we actually are going to start pairing freshmen with the upper level seniors who are doing these design projects. And so you're pairing this kind of like this zeal of these upper class students who are about to go off into the work world and actually have a lot of technical experience and enough to actually build things. But you're now kind of channeling some of that zeal of like the undergrads who are still like the freshmen who still like believe in the things that they came into MIT believing before they've sort of gotten pulled away to Facebook, Amazon, Google, and all that. So hopefully we'll see this like beautiful like undergraduate mentorship that should accelerate that.
I was like, how do you inoculate against the loss of idealism?
Yeah, exactly.
We need a vaccine.
I've talked to had a few conversations with students, who are currently juniors and seniors who went through Terrascope and asked them kind of like, well, what was different? What do you value about what you did in Terrascope? And one of the more common answers that surprises me is that many of them say, well, that was the last time I worked in a team across majors. And that seems like a blind spot because I think many of us as people within MIT, whether staff or faculty or researchers, we get a lot of our excitement from interdisciplinary collaboration, because it kind of keeps us on our learning edge. And to not have that students experience that and to kind of broaden their skill set seems like a missed opportunity. So.
All right. So let's get right to it. We are facing an existential crisis, and if you had asked me to speak 5 years ago at this panel, I might not have said that, but that is now the situation. And we're not in a situation where we can sort of tinker around the edges and think of this is an issue in parallel with all these other issues. This is the overriding issue. And I've been in this field for a while, and so I'm very aware of how the science is showing us how things are changing. And we are towards the very end of our opportunity to make some changes. So I believe that every single student that comes into MIT or any other university needs to be seeing the world through that lens, and their education and their skill building through that lens. So that means thinking about what you do from the perspective of the circular economy, to use a short term. How is what I'm doing helping the planet and not hurting the planet? Like if I am working on, I don't know, I'll pick something, robotics, there are lots of plastic. Like how is that plastic going to be not ending up and causing like immense ecological degradation if I have to say, like, I don't think research in how to use oil as our main energy source is any longer a topic that should be taught, because that we cannot continue in that way. So, and then having approaches and solutions that are equitable. In my world, we call it the equity lens. It's not a good term, but is something that also needs to be very much part of how we think about deployment and implementation of all our ideas. So I would say everyone who comes in gets to do a climate change practicum, if you will, that is project-based and is in the time frame of, like, we're talking decades, we're not talking centuries. And what is it that my work and my projects and my learning contributes to improvement of the planet? And I rode up the elevator with someone, and he told me he was a student in the economics department, and it is as relevant to come up with financial strategies that can help us with the energy transition as it is for the psychology student who's dealing with people who have eco-anxiety, as it is for urban planners and engineers. And I could speak about this with a lot more examples and details, but suffice it to say that circular economy, shared use of resources, and equity are three things that need to be very much part of everyone's education. And so I think every student should be participating in having their learning and work reflected in those principles.
For me, I think it's a lot about contextualizing what it is that you're learning. So I was born in Brazil, and the Brazilian culture is very focused on sustainability. So it's something that I've always grown up with, and it's something that I'm always trying to make connections with. And I chose to do chemical engineering because I thought that that was the best route for me to get to a sustainability position in the future. But like, for example, we learn a lot about distillation columns for separating out streams. But never in class do we talk about the fact that if you take all the distillation columns in the world and look at the percentage of energy that gets used just for separating these things, it's actually a significant portion of the world's energy consumption. So even adding a sentence like that where, you know, sure, now you know how to separate these things effectively, but now you know a little bit more about the impact that it's having on the world, not just on the products, but actually like on the entire system and what impacts it can have on climate change. So I think that there's a lot of things missing in that kind of realm where I didn't really get that much connection back. I know the technical stuff pretty well because MIT, but I don't necessarily know how it can tie back to sustainability, even though I think everything that we learn here at MIT has some kind of that connection.
I think we're really good at talking about the value that new technologies bring, and we just kind of would like to ignore a lot of the things that are not so good. And even though we might be creating value for us here and locally, we might be sort of extracting too much value from somewhere else and depressing another region. And so for me as an educator, I'm trying to incorporate like life cycle analysis into a lot of these products that the students are building. Because the project that my class is currently working on is carbon neutral cooling. And that includes things like you can't use refrigerants, and we're trying to not use any plastics, and just trying to, like, the whole system is made out of wood and aluminum pretty much. But just trying to think in that mindset, and it makes the engineering a lot more difficult. And the students will be like, well, we can make it cheaper, and we can like add so much value, like you can make so much more money by using like this brand new refrigerant. And we have to be like, well, you know, no, that's not the goal here. And at least just going through the thought exercise of figuring out what is everything that someone gains and what is everything that someone loses in this process.
And I guess the very short thing I would add is that I don't see that there's a separation between the efforts that are being made by many people in this room to make MIT as an institution and its practices more sustainable, and what we do in the classrooms. You know, I feel like if it's going to be effective, it has to be a whole cloth, you know, move towards sustainability, not just we're preparing students for a sustainable world outside of MIT. You know, we need to sort of involve students while they're here in MIT's own efforts.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I guess it's not all negative, right? So I just wanted to say that within the 4 years that I've been here, I mean, the ESI, the Environment Sustainability minor, has been created. which is amazing and awesome. There have been new committees that have come up within UA Sustain. There's a bunch of cool initiatives that are going on all across campus. So it's not, there's a lot of stuff still to be done, but there has been a lot that has already been done, so not to make that less.
Yeah, I think that actually raises a question for me where there is a tremendous amount of stuff happening on campus, and a lot of that stuff is driven and directed and dreamed up by the people who are here today. But given sort of MIT's decentralization, right, it's often kind of hard, I think, for students to navigate through it and can kind of find themselves at the end of a 4-year education and say like, damn, I wish I had known about those 80 things that I now don't have time to participate in. And so I'm curious, sort of, we have one proposal on the table to have a required practicum on climate for all MIT students. Structurally, what needs to change here to really make sustainability more prominent, more embedded, to make the kinds of competencies that need to be developed in students something that they would have to go out of their way to avoid as opposed to seek out kind of intentionally, which maybe is the case now?
For me, I think getting people really early is really important. So when I was a freshman, I came in at orientation, and there was these groups of volunteers that were part of the Graduate Student Council Committee on Sustainability who were standing at the waste bins telling people where to put stuff. And so, I mean, orientation's your first day here at MIT, and I was like, wow, MIT's really dedicated to sustainability. This is great. And then I never saw them again. And actually, that was the last time that that organization was actually working at an orientation. And so I think it was really cool for me because right from the get-go, I saw that MIT was dedicated to sustainability, and so I kind of went out of my way to try and find what were those ways that they were dedicated, and then tried to get involved in however way I could. So I think that there's a big part in terms of like reaching out to people early so that they know, but it's also incredibly difficult. I mean, I've been here for 4 years, and I mean, last month I found out about a bunch of new things going on at Sloan, or like, so it's, 4 years is definitely not enough time to learn about all the different things that are going on campus. But I think communication and just encouraging people to seek out what they're interested in, that's difficult because I've been working pretty closely with some people at ESI, and we've come up with a term that, when you get here to MIT, it's a jungle, and then you get given a machete and told to like go through it. And I definitely think that that's the case.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I had this experience, and I know a lot of my friends did, but you come into MIT and you're like, I'm going to change the world as undergrad. And then like a month later, you're like, I need to get a job. Yeah. Like, I need to work at one of these big companies. And you go to the career fair and you see like the Googles and the Amazons and all these fancy companies. And so what I'm realizing is that just there are no role models that are being presented to these students in the sustainability realm. And it's just like, how do if I care about sustainability, okay, great, I'm like this young, malleable person, who do I model my life and career after? And there are so many people like who'd be great role models, but we're not presenting them effectively, I think, to the students.
And you do have this other pathway that I think of almost as a slip and slide.
Oh, yeah.
You get on from day one that sort of shoots you down a particular path, and you wake up 4 years later and you're a Course 6 major and you've got a job with one of the big tech firms. And so I think it's hard to get off of that and navigate through. I mean, these are not always linear career paths too, right? They require a machete sometimes, even in the best case. So it's hard to sort of ask students to navigate that on their own. So from a practitioner perspective, we're seeing kind of younger practitioners entering the field. How well equipped are they? Like, what do you wish they knew, or how do you wish that the educational system was preparing them differently for work?
So I would just say to this point that has not changed. It was the same. And not only did you have the MIT course catalog, you had the Harvard and the Wellesley, and it was just like, how does that even? It's a very big challenge because the world is open to you, and how do you even choose? So I have, for the last 2 decades, have a large number of interns that work with us on climate, energy, transportation, et cetera. And I think the way, so a lot of those people actually end up working for us, so they sort of get on-the-job training. But again, it's it's sort of pulling it all together, like rather than just having sort of individual competencies and individual tracks of expertise. And it was very positive to hear about what you're doing in your class with the life cycle analysis and thinking. And somebody, I think Maureen said, systems thinking. I think another aspect that is very, very important and is logic models, monitoring and evaluation, because when you're trying to deal with these enormous issues, you could do any number of things. There's 1,000 things that I could do tomorrow that would address climate change, but is that the biggest bang for the buck? Is that what will get us somewhere? So like that I feel like is something that could really be done more of, like to take an awesome problem and say, okay, like we can have all these different approaches. Which ones are actually going to get us the highest chance of some kind of an outcome? So that I feel is like something that is missing specifically, that we don't see people coming in with that level of, with much competency in that area.
I think there are a number of ways that the Institute communicates what's important. And it's not just from top down, it's also bottom up from the students. And I do think that there is, there are these big flagship classes that have amazing end of term presentations. They're not about sustainability. They're about toys or or whatever. And they're great classes. They're amazing educational experiences. But I wonder, how do we start to kind of give sustainability some of that sex appeal that other paths have, and I think it's possible. I think that students can attach real pride to something that they're working on. I think it needs to be connected to the real world, and I think that's where the pride and the challenge really comes from.
Yeah, and my sense is that students crave that connection back to the real world, and that's what makes a lot of those courses and the experiences really satisfying. So I'm curious, before we shift to take questions or comments from the audience, like if there was one thing that you could add into the jungle at MIT, if there's one thing that you could change or do differently to sort of make this sustainability education ecosystem better, for students, for their learning, for the world, like what would you do differently? Give everyone a machete.
That's tough. One quick thing that comes to mind is just something that you've worked on a lot with your work with PKG is just changing MIT's language in that most sustainability-related challenges out in the world are not. It's not MIT solving the problems for others, it's MIT solving the problems with others. And I think changing how we talk about how our impact on the world is a good step.
I think to that point, everything we do is with all the other stakeholders in the community, and it's better for it. And there's so many examples now. I work with many of you on trying to advance a lot of these principles in our Cambridge society, and that collaboration is extremely important. And you will not move with the speed you need without that.
I think to add to that, I think we need this sense of, or just more self-reflection, so that not only are we not going out there and trying to solve the world's problems, but we're not creating the world's problems as well. And sort of check, like, there needs to be some like checks and balances to see that we're not just generating plastic products and things that are actually making people's lives a lot worse in other places.
For me, it's, I guess, a little bit different because I guess I'm a little bit of a big doer. So the problems that I've kind of encountered on campus, I've tried to do something about. So I've actually started or co-founded 3 different things on campus that are related to sustainability. So one was the outreach subcommittee within the Undergraduate Association Committee on Sustainability. One was Waste Watchers. And then the other one is actually my task, which is the MIT Action Sustainability Corps. And each of these have been in completely different realms. So my task is with ESI. I'm working very closely with them to kind of actually help on that self-reflection piece and actually trying to help people or give people that MechE to attack the jungle with.
Can you say a little bit more about what my task is?
Sure. So my task, we started it actually at the beginning of the semester, and we have our first cohort of members, which is really exciting. We have 21 people. It's kind of 50-50 undergrad, grad, and our goal is to kind of, that's where the swallow from, when did we take time to swallow from the fire hose came from. Basically, we're trying to encourage people to sit down and think about what it is that they're doing and how it's connected to sustainability, kind of contextualize what it is that they're doing in a global way. So one of the questions we're asking is, how is your work connected to one of the UN Sustainable Development Goals? Which is never anything that I stop to think about with any of the work that I've done. And then the other side to that is not just the self-reflection piece, but also this idea that it's really hard sometimes if you have an opportunity to do an internship with a company, you might not feel confident enough to tell them, okay, I'll work for you, but only if it's a sustainability-related project. Sometimes you don't have that option to be, that kind of upfront about the fact that, I only want to work if it's in sustainability. And so we're trying in the future. Our goal is to kind of help develop this list of companies that have discussed with us and said that we guarantee an MIT student an internship in sustainability with us to kind of take the risk away from the student. So I'm really excited about what we're doing. We had our first workshop last weekend, and there's another one coming up with some really great speakers. So we'll see what happens, but I think it's going to be really cool. And so then Waste Watchers, if some of you went to the table, basically that thing that happened at orientation that I mentioned earlier was volunteer-based, and it kind of failed because people at MIT have priorities. We all do. So basically what we've tried to do is kind of institutionalize it. So now we're a department group under Ruth Davis, who is manager of facilities. And so it's actually a paid position. We've fundraised we have money to be able to pay these students and to get the supplies that we need. We actually piloted so we're turning a year old, which is super exciting. But we piloted at One Sustainable World last year with 10,000 attendees. And since then have worked with a variety of different departments and events. So that's growing a ton and is super cool because we're trying to do that, change the behavior of the students at MIT, because sometimes people think they know where something goes and are trying to do their best, but actually because waste is so site-specific, it's not really what happens here at MIT. So we're trying to change that piece. And then with outreach with UA Sustain, I felt like we were doing a lot on campus, but not necessarily reaching out to the community. So now we've done some programs where we've gone out to schools in the area and actually tried to work with teachers themselves to incorporate sustainability into the things that they're already teaching. We've done river cleanups, with the Charles River cleanup was actually also last weekend. Gone out to beaches. We do the Red Sox sometimes have cleanup days you get a free game and help actually correctly sort stuff at the end of it. And so that's actually been a great way to really engage with the broader MIT community, because a lot of the things that the committee does is, the people who are involved in the projects are actually within the subcommittee, so we already know that they're dedicated to sustainability. But if you say you're going to get a free Red Sox game and learn how to sort things correctly, people get a little bit more excited, and the spots fill up pretty quick. And so with the Charles River cleanup last week, we had 50 people that were not in UA Sustain actually come and interact. So the things that I have noticed were things that I thought should change. I guess I have kind of tried to attempt to help out with. So on top of those, I'm not sure if I have any other big things other than the things that have already been mentioned.
I think that's enough. I think you can graduate feeling like you've left MIT in a better place than when you found it, arguably. So I want to turn it over to the audience and take some questions for the panelists. I see Sarah.
First of all, I would like to clarify. That's okay, no worries. First of all, I wanted to clarify that the MIT is a jungle, here's a machete, comes from Kate. Oh. and that's her metaphor. I did want to ask about, there's this initiative to try to help people think about reflection and their values and how that ties into what they choose to do in the future so that they don't lose their path.
But I have a larger question, which is how do you make sure that you don't start an initiative that's the small group of people who are dedicated to this when there are hundreds of students on this campus where this is completely lost to them? So I know we talk sometimes about infiltration, but it doesn't seem like infiltration is necessarily that it works so well when the incentives of the system at large are not aligned around this. So what I wanted to ask was, how do you imagine doing this and doing this well?
My suggestion is that it's everyone, not a select group of people, that it is a value that the institution holds, that everyone who enters the school goes through some form, and it's not for me to design it in detail, but that everyone goes through some form of course or practice or whatever that introduces the issues of sustainability and planetary survival, and discusses the principles that are involved in this, as, again, using shorthands, the circular economy. If I make something, what's going to happen with that thing down the road, and what were the resources that were used to make it in the first place, and what are my actions and products and activities equitable and have benefit across society, not just a small group. So my suggestion is that it becomes an introductory activity that everyone goes through.
Yeah, I totally agree. We have GIRs, trying to learn the fundamentals of science, chemistry, biology, physics, math, and I feel like sustainability is like pretty key to just science existing at all. Like we have to, if this planet goes, to shit, so to speak, then like what's the point of science? So I really do think it should be like an institute level thing where it's the sort of the first thing you do when you get here. Start talking about it.
And I wonder in the interim whether there are ways we can, accept the system of trying to change the system down the line, but accept the system as it is for now and try to find creative ways of working within the limits of the students. So for example, next year, all first years have these these extra credits that are specifically for discovery, major discovery. What if some of those spaces were sustainability-related courses that introduced them to not only things like circular economy and Earth systems thinking, but also the majors that those open on to, or IEP. I think there's a real hunger for students to understand the climate system, but they're not going to take a 12-credit course about it, even if Susan Solomon's offering it. And so that's life, and we have to figure out how to capture those students in another way, I guess.
Definitely agree with all of that, but I also think it's important to kind of put yourself in the other people's shoes and try to come up with other incentives that kind of sneak in the sustainability.
That's right.
So that's kind of what we've tried to do in a couple of different situations. So with Waste Watchers, you get paid and you get free food. Oh, and you also get trained on how to sort your waste properly. And so, in our application, we have like a why do you want to be a waste watcher? And there's a large amount of people that are like, oh, this is an amazing thing. Like, I really want to be contributing to sustainability on campus. But there are people that are just like, I get to go to cool events, get paid, and get food. Like, why not? So that's like one way. And then also like with outreach, taking them to a free ball game is like a great incentive to a lot of people. And then like, so like having these opportunities where it's something like cool that anyone would really be interested in, and then like sneaking in the sustainability behind the curtain, I think, is a really great way to kind of impact that larger MIT community.
It's like those recipes where you bake the broccoli into the brownie.
Exactly.
I think. Okay, great, Sarah.
Just to follow up on what you guys are talking about, and I'm not a scientist or a faculty member or an MIT student, I just do politics, but it's so interesting, because your responses were all so kind of reflecting the nature of the institute, in the interim, sneaking it in. I don't know about baking the broccoli with the broccoli. Sounds like a good idea. But when do we, as an institute, decide that something is so incredibly important that there isn't in the interim and sneaking it in? It's like it's now. It's what Susanne said at the very beginning. Isn't this that topic? And so isn't there a way institutionally to think differently about, the way we usually work? Can't we just say, time out, guys? And it's like when there's a clinical study, someone's running a trial and you find out that either the drug is really working or it's really bad, and so you stop the trial one way or other and you start, using the drug, or you stop using the drug. Aren't we there? Don't we have to be different?
I think the question you're asking to an audience or to a panel that'll say enthusiastically, yes, we are there. We've been there for a while. I think the interesting question is, how does the institute respond to that? Right? If you sort of got to a unanimous agreement that this is a moment where we need to take action, what is the action that we take?
Is it some senior capstone that people do, or is it something in the first year, or is it
right. Where you add to a GIR or?
Right. But I think it's a great question to be asking.
And I ask that question to every senior administrator I see, on I feel like it's a daily basis. And I actually think that we're past that point where we can't wait for the institute to enact some sweeping policy. We need to start this massive, almost grassroots movement where how do we get the people in the institute to care about these things?
Well, it's actually more of a comment. I really appreciate the enthusiasm, and I don't know if you know this, but right next door is the executive committee of MIT, and they're meeting. So
we're going to storm the Bastille? Is that the?
I just saw President Reif, I saw Israel. I was like, oh. But, so at least in my career here, one of the things that always moves administration is hearing from faculty and students. You guys are the ones that are here. You're why we're here. And what I would like to say is that if you can yourselves, or maybe tell your friends, is that sending a letter or any form of communication that you can come up with to the administration to say that you care, you want change, and I can guarantee you that they will hear you, and because we're here for you. So I just wanted to put that out there.
I love the evolution of this event. Last year, I got a tote bag, and this year there are tattoos on offer, and we're plotting the revolution. So it's very exciting to come to this conference. I think we have time for one more question or comment. Or are people ready to have lunch?
Or stored in there?
Yes, well, yeah, lunch. Great, well, thanks so much, and I think we're moving on.